Hello and welcome to The Resourceful Woman. It has been well over a year since the last time I uploaded, so any of you who are still with me from before, hi! I didn't abandon you completely. I just had a lot of other things going on in my life in the last year. Quite a few things that have gone on that may be showing up over the coming weeks if I can actually get some time to sit down and edit. For one thing, I got married and I filmed all of my efforts at trying to design and sew my own wedding dress, all of which turned out to be a complete disaster, which required an emergency backup dress at the last minute. I have a whole thing about all of my gardening attempts in the last year, which started with abandoning trying to garden any kind of edible food and go instead for medicinal herbs, which wound up in a completely accidental garden covered in tomatoes that I never even planted in the first place. That's a really fun story that, I'll put together and share with you guys. I've got lots of things coming up in terms of, I've still been carrying on with trying to make myself a kind of a thrifted homemade capsule wardrobe. So I've been taking some of my charity shop finds, taking them apart and redesigning them for myself. So you'll see some of that. And I even have a really ambitious project that I just finished recently. It took me a year of sweating about it before I could even begin because I was certain that I would make an absolute mess of it, but it came out okay in the end. This involves taking apart a beloved piece of clothing. I think we've all had this. You have your one favorite thing that you bought one of and you wear it into the ground and then you're like, but I'll never find the same thing again. So what I did with my favorite raincoat was I took it apart stitch by stitch so that I could copy it and recreate it into a new raincoat in new fabric. So and it actually came out okay, I think. But today, I'm going to be talking about, this is a really simple one. It's not an upcycle, it's not a recycle, anything. It's just this really lovely friend of mine came to me when she found out that I was really into sewing. And she said, oh, well, I've found this pattern at, I think it was like a vintage pattern from a charity shop or something. Could you make me this dress? That reminds me of my youth kind of thing. It's really, really cute, fun little 60s, 70s style dress. And I said, yes, sure, of course. We went and picked out some fabric together and I put this thing together. I had mostly, it was, quick and easy, good time, but I came across some challenges which I'm going to talk about and show you. So let's just get into this. As you can see, this pattern was a single size. Oftentimes on current patterns, what you'll find is they'll give a pattern with 5 or 6 sizes, like from size 8 up to size 14 or something like that. And they'll do different lines for the different sizes. This was not that. So I had to compare my friend's measurements to what the given size on this pattern was, and then try to figure out what needed to go up and go down. And as I did this, you'll find later it actually still came out too big and I had to cut it down quite a bit. But I tried to start by studying the construction of the dress. My friend wanted the neckline from one type of the pattern and sleeves from another. It's always really important before you ever start with pattern sewing to kind of go through the whole pattern, look at all of the instructions and figure out how it's going to come together step by step and think through how to construct it. I was also doing this with an additional lining, so I had to think through how was the lining going to be sewn in cohesively with the rest of the dress, and also where to put the interfacing. So I started out actually by ironing the pattern pieces themselves, because this was somebody's old pattern that had been used and was quite creased, and I needed to have these pieces all out perfectly flat that I could transfer them. And you can see the previous owner had actually cut into the pattern. There are places where it says to kind of put darts or put cuts and things, and so they had already done that on this pattern, so I had to be really careful about constructing around these pieces and make sure that I was following all the instructions, laying it out, and cutting according to the instructions. I always get nervous when I'm about to start any kind of new project, especially if I haven't sewn in a few weeks or a couple months. So I started with cutting out the interfacing pieces just to kind of get myself in the groove of pattern cutting again. Now, it's also always advisable to wash and iron your fabric when possible before beginning to cut and piece it. Obviously, you don't need to wash the interfacing, but you should wash and iron out your main fabric and your lining fabric whenever you can. There are lots of ways to transfer the pattern onto the fabric and cut it out. You can use washable transfer paper. You'll see what I did with the interfacing was I used chalks. You can pin it. There's lots of different sewers have different kind of preferred methods. For me, I tend to go by how heavy and how slippy the fabric actually is to kind of decide what my best option is. Because this fabric was quite slippy, I decided that for this way I was going to use weights. In this case, I was actually using stone coasters as weights to hold the fabric and the pattern together in place, and then cut out around it with the rotary cutter, and then trimmed with scissors around some of the pattern markings. Following the pattern instructions, I sewed up the darts on the front and back pieces of the outer and inner layers, and then pressed the seams down in the direction indicated. I trimmed down the pieces of interfacing from what I had originally cut out from the pattern because I wanted to retain plenty of seam allowance for French seams. The original pattern didn't call for French seams, but I had decided that that would be the best way for me to hide the seams using the lining and the outer fabric. So with right sides facing, I pinned together the outer and inner layers at the shoulders and neckline, taking care to match up the pattern markings, and sewed. I then pressed down the seams on the front and back and turned the matching pieces inside out and pressed down the seam allowances. Now, based on some good advice I've gotten from other YouTubers, I inserted a stay stitch in the inside neckline, and I definitely would recommend this to the next person. The 4 front and back pieces can now be joined at the shoulders. I don't know how it is for other amateur sewists out there, but I find zippers to be one of my most difficult bits to get right in a garment. So I spent quite a bit of time lining this zipper up with all of the back pieces, getting the lines straight and perfectly even. I would later remove the zip entirely because the dress turned out to be too big and didn't need it, but here's a bit of footage about it anyways. Next came the sleeves. I ran a gathering stitch where indicated along the shoulder end of each sleeve. It's really important to remember to hem the wrist end of your sleeves before you start to sew them up or attach them to anything. Setting sleeves is always tricky, and in this case I was doing French seams, so I was starting out with the wrong sides together. I find it's useful to start by pinning where the shoulder seam meets the uppermost part of the sleeve edge first, then pinning where the armpit edges will meet. From there, you can tug the gathering stitch until the remainder of the sleeve edge can be paired with the armhole of the dress. Depending on how much wider the shoulder of the sleeve is compared to the armhole, this gather will create a small or large puff at the shoulder. At this stage, with the dress constructed and the first of the French seams done on the sleeves and body, I had my friend try on the dress and do a fitting. As mentioned earlier, we discovered that the dress was a bit big, so I removed the zip and took it in at a few places. When all of the adjustments were done, I trimmed down the hems on the sleeves and body and made a second set of seams to close everything in. At the next try-on, we realized I had got the bottom hem wrong. You can see down there how it is just really lumpy. The inside lining just did not match up correctly with the outer dress, so it made it all gather funny and hang funny. But everything else seemed to work, and she seemed to like it. So here is my lovely friend modeling her new dress. I took it back from her then and hung the dress overnight to let the fabric kind of hang and do its thing. And then I went back over the hems so that it would hang and swish properly. So that was it. That was a project I don't do very often, is, kind of creating a garment from scratch. I normally kind of try to work with things that are fixes or copies or upcycles. In this case, this was a really fun exercise for me in working with old vintage patterns and having to work out what the size was going to be, and also having to work out certain little fixes that I wanted to do, like the French seams, how I was going to work that into the existing pattern. And also, in this one, it was just a little bit challenging working with a pattern that had belonged to somebody else and they had cut into, and I had to kind of go, did they do this right? Did they do the wrong cuts? Am I, getting this just so? So that was pretty interesting. And I did discover about myself, and this is true on several of my projects, is that I'm not always the greatest at doing bottom hems. That's something that I probably need to watch a lot more other videos and get better at. All in all, this was a really good project and I really enjoyed it. I hope that my friend likes it. I hope that she wears the dress sometimes. If you like this video, please be sure to like and subscribe. Leave me a comment if you have any questions or anything to say about it. I know that I am definitely not an expert, so if you're watching this and it sets your teeth on edge because I do things wrong, let me know. I could probably learn from some of you out there. And if you enjoyed it and you want to see more like this, let me know. I've got boxes of vintage patterns to work from, and I could definitely try to do some more stuff like from scratch like this, if it would be interesting to watch. So thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.